It was a calm morning, the kind where the street still felt half asleep and the city was just starting to stretch awake. The mall opened not long ago, and a few people wandered between stores sipping coffee or checking their phones. In one of the upscale clothing shops, the atmosphere was quiet, until a nervous voice from behind the counter called mall security. The young security guard who answered the call sounded calm, but his tone carried that edge of excitement that comes with something unexpected. "We've got a possible shoplifting in progress," he said into the radio. The guard said a woman had been acting strangely, trying on several expensive items and heading toward the exit without paying. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up outside the main entrance. Two officers stepped out, both looking ready for what they assumed was a routine call. Officer Daniel, tall and serious-faced, had been on the job for a few years. His partner, Officer Reed, was newer and still had that sense of nervous energy in him, eager to prove himself. They walked quickly toward the store, the sound of their boots echoing off the tiled floor. Inside, the store manager rushed to meet them. He pointed toward the back, where a woman stood near a rack of coats holding a few shopping bags. "That's her," the manager whispered sharply. "She's been switching tags and trying to leave without paying." The officers looked at the woman. She didn't look like the usual suspects they dealt with. She was dressed neatly, her posture calm and confident. She wasn't trying to sneak away. She was just standing there glancing at her phone. Daniel approached carefully, introducing himself and asking her name. The woman turned to face them, her expression calm. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked in a composed voice. "We got a report about possible theft," Daniel said politely but firmly. "Could you show us what's in your bags, please?" She hesitated for a moment, then handed them over without argument. Inside were a few clothing items, still with tags on them. She reached for her wallet and tried to show her ID. But Reed was already speaking into his radio, asking for a female officer to come for a search. "Ma'am, please keep your hands visible," Daniel said. The woman sighed softly. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can," Reed interrupted. "But we'll need to verify your information first." A few bystanders had gathered outside the store entrance, pretending to browse but clearly watching the scene unfold. The woman didn't raise her voice or protest. She looked more disappointed than frightened. She handed her ID again, and Daniel glanced at it briefly. "Helena Brooks," he read aloud. "Address in the city. Occupation." He squinted. "Deputy Chief?" He looked up, confused. "That's right," she said quietly. Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Ma'am, we've seen a lot of fake IDs before. You'll have to come with us until we sort this out." Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to explain more, but she stopped herself. She seemed to decide it wasn't worth arguing. "All right," she said calmly. Reed gently took her by the arm and guided her outside while Daniel followed behind. The onlookers whispered as the officers led her through the mall toward the exit. The woman kept her head high, not saying a word. Her calmness almost made Daniel uneasy. Most people in her position would have panicked or pleaded by now. At the patrol car, they asked her to place her hands behind her back. "You're detaining me for shoplifting?" she asked softly. "Until we can confirm everything," Daniel said, avoiding her gaze. She gave a small nod. "Then do what you have to do." The cuffs clicked around her wrists. Reed noticed how she didn't resist at all. Her eyes, calm and steady, stayed on the horizon as if she were thinking about something far away. As they drove back to the station, Reed glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You seem awfully calm for someone being arrested," he said, half joking, half curious. "Panicking doesn't help," she replied simply. Daniel shifted in his seat. He felt an odd discomfort growing inside. Something about her composure didn't fit. It wasn't arrogance, it was control, like someone who'd seen far worse situations than this. When they arrived at the station, they guided her inside. A few officers looked up, surprised to see them bringing in such a well-dressed woman in handcuffs. One officer at the desk raised an eyebrow. "What's this about?" "Shoplifting," Daniel said shortly. The officer at the desk chuckled. "Doesn't look like the type." "Yeah, that's what they all say," Reed replied with a nervous grin, trying to keep things light. They led her to a small interview room. She sat down quietly while Daniel started filling out the paperwork. He asked her routine questions, address, date of birth, occupation. Each time she answered calmly, without hesitation. When he got to occupation, she repeated it. "Deputy Chief, City Police Department." Daniel paused, his pen freezing midair. He looked at her again. She didn't blink. Deputy Chief of what? Reed asked skeptically. The department you work for, she said softly. For a moment, silence filled the room. Daniel laughed nervously, shaking his head. Okay, we'll confirm that. He typed her name into the system, expecting nothing unusual. But a second later, the screen flashed red. An alert message popped up. High-level personnel restricted access. Daniel frowned, retyped it, thinking he made a mistake. The same message appeared again. He glanced at Reed. Hey, something's weird here. Reed leaned over to look. What does that mean? I don't know, Daniel murmured. He picked up the phone and called the supervisor on duty. Sergeant, can you check something for me? We brought in a woman named Helena Brooks, claims to be a deputy chief. The system's flagging her as restricted access. There was a long pause on the line. Then the sergeant's voice came back low and firm. Repeat that name. Helena Brooks. Another pause. Daniel, the voice said finally. You didn't, by any chance, put her in cuffs, did you? Daniel hesitated. Yeah, we did. Why? The sergeant let out a long sigh. Take them off now. That's your boss you've got sitting in that chair. Daniel's stomach dropped. Reed's mouth fell open. They looked at each other, frozen in disbelief. You're joking, Reed whispered. I wish I was, the sergeant said. You just arrested the deputy chief of the entire department. Daniel hung up slowly and looked at the woman across the table. She was sitting quietly watching them. She didn't look angry, just patient, almost as if she had expected this reaction. Ma'am, Daniel said carefully, I think there's been a misunderstanding. She gave a small nod. I believe so. Reed quickly moved to unlock the cuffs, his hands trembling. We're so sorry, ma'am. We didn't realize. It's all right, she said calmly. You were doing your job. Daniel didn't know what to say. His heart was pounding. How had this happened? How had they not recognized her? He'd seen her name on department memos, even a few official photos, but never in person. And now, of all people, he had handcuffed her in a shopping mall. She rubbed her wrists gently after the cuffs came off, then looked at him. I'd like to speak with your sergeant, please. Of course, Daniel said quickly, motioning Reed to fetch him. While they waited, the room felt thick with tension. Daniel kept glancing at her, unsure whether to apologize again or stay quiet. She didn't seem angry, just thoughtful, as if she were already analyzing the situation from another angle. When the sergeant arrived, he nearly stumbled through the door. Deputy Chief, I am so sorry, he began. Helena raised a hand. It's fine. No harm done. Her voice was calm but carried quiet authority. I just hope this will be a reminder to always verify before acting. You never know who's sitting in front of you. The sergeant nodded quickly. Daniel felt the weight of her words sink deep. She wasn't lecturing, just stating a fact, and somehow that made it even heavier. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and looked at Daniel once more. You handled yourself professionally, she said. You followed procedure. But next time, trust your eyes a little more. Details matter. With that, she walked out of the room, leaving the two officers standing there in stunned silence. When the door closed, Reed finally spoke. We just arrested our own boss. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. Yeah, he said quietly. And she didn't even yell. They sat there for a long moment, the weight of what happened slowly settling in. What was supposed to be a simple shoplifting call had turned into something none of them would forget. Outside, the sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway. She moved with the calm confidence of someone used to being in control, even when everything around her spiraled out of it. Neither officer knew it yet, but this strange morning would soon become the story everyone in the department would be talking about. A story that would test reputations, humility, and what it really meant to serve with integrity. After the woman left the station, the room stayed strangely quiet. The air felt heavier than before, like everyone was trying to understand what had just happened. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the computer screen without seeing anything. Reed paced back and forth, still mumbling under his breath. Deputy Chief, he repeated for what felt like the 10th time. She's the deputy chief, we cuffed her. In front of people. At the mall, Daniel rubbed his forehead. I know. She said we did our job, Reed continued, but come on, man, she's got to be furious. What if she files a report against us? Daniel didn't answer. Deep down, he wasn't afraid of punishment. He was more bothered by the way she had looked at them. Not angry, not humiliated, but almost disappointed. That calm expression, that quiet authority kept replaying in his mind. He'd never met anyone who carried themselves like that, even in a situation that would have made anyone else explode. The station buzzed with whispers for the rest of the day. News traveled fast inside the department. By afternoon, almost everyone knew that 2 patrol officers had arrested the deputy chief for shoplifting. People tried to hide their laughter when Daniel and Reed passed by, but the smirks were obvious. "Hey, boss catchers," someone joked near the lockers. "Next time you're gonna arrest the mayor?" Reed forced a small laugh and walked away. Daniel didn't even respond. He knew how this worked. People would talk for a few days, then something else would happen and they'd move on. But this time, it didn't feel like one of those stories that fades easily. Late that afternoon, Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a message from the sergeant. "Deputy Chief wants to see you and Reed tomorrow morning. Conference room, 9 a.m. sharp." Reed read the message over Daniel's shoulder and groaned. "That's it. We're done." "Relax," Daniel said quietly, though he didn't believe it himself. "Maybe she just wants to talk." Reed stared at him. "Talk? Daniel, we handcuffed her in public. People filmed it. This is going to be a disaster." That night, Daniel didn't sleep much. He kept replaying the scene in his head. Her calm voice, the confusion on everyone's faces the moment he realized who she was. There was something else too, something he couldn't quite explain. When she said, "Trust your eyes a little more," it felt like she meant more than the incident itself. The next morning, they arrived at the station early. The building felt unusually quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something. At exactly 9, they walked into the conference room. The deputy chief was already there, standing near the window, looking out at the parking lot below. She turned as they entered. Her face was unreadable, neither friendly nor cold, just calm. "Good morning, officers," she said. "Good morning, ma'am," Daniel replied. Reed echoed the greeting, his voice a little shaky. She gestured toward the chairs. "Please sit," they did. The silence stretched for a few seconds before she spoke again. "I reviewed the incident from yesterday," she said slowly. "I read your reports, and I also reviewed the store's security footage." Reed swallowed hard. "Ma'am, we didn't mean—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "You were doing your job." "That's exactly why we're here." They exchanged confused looks. "I want to walk you through what really happened," she continued. "Not because I'm angry, but because there's something much larger behind all this." Daniel leaned forward slightly, unsure where this was going. She took a small folder from the table and opened it. Inside were several photos, images of different women taken inside the same clothing store. "In the last 3 months," she said, 5 women have been reported for shoplifting from that same store. Every single one of them was innocent. Each one was humiliated, detained, and later cleared. And yet every report came from the same store manager. Daniel frowned. "You mean the one who called us yesterday?" She nodded. "Yes, there have been several complaints filed against him, but none were taken seriously because the cases always ended with no evidence found. So I decided to test something myself." "You mean you were undercover?" Reed asked. "I was," she said, "but not in the way you might think. I wanted to see how both the store staff and our officers would respond. I didn't tell anyone because I wanted it to be real. I wanted to see the genuine reaction of everyone involved." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "So we were part of the test?" "In a way, yes," she said. "But don't misunderstand, I didn't set you up to fail. I wanted to observe how our team reacts to reports that rely more on assumptions than facts." Reed lowered his head. "We didn't verify her ID. We just believed what the manager said." The deputy chief looked at him kindly. "You followed procedure. You responded quickly. You were polite. That's good policing. But there's one thing that even good officers sometimes forget. You can follow the rules and still make the wrong call." Daniel looked down at the table. The truth of her words hit deep. He'd been proud of being by the book. But now he saw how sometimes that book wasn't enough. She continued, "Our job isn't just about catching suspects. It's about understanding people. Every person we meet has a story. Sometimes that story is more important than the evidence we think we see." For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room. Then she said something that surprised them both. "You should know, I was proud of how calm you remained through the process. You didn't use force. You didn't raise your voices. You treated me respectfully. That's what saved you. Because if you hadn't, this would be a very different conversation. Reed nodded slowly. We were just trying to do what we thought was right. I know, she said. That's why you're here instead of suspended. Daniel let out a quiet breath. He hadn't realized how tense he'd been until that moment. She smiled faintly. Mistakes happen. The point is to learn from them. And both of you just got the kind of lesson most officers don't get until much later in their careers. Reed looked up. So what happens now? You're both going to attend a special training session I'm organizing next week, she said. We'll go over real cases, real decisions, and how to balance instinct with procedure. I want officers who can think, not just react. Daniel nodded. We'd be honored, ma'am. She studied them for a moment. One more thing, she added. Yesterday, when I was standing in that store, I noticed something. Neither of you treated me like a criminal. You were cautious but respectful. That's rare these days. Don't lose that. That simple compliment carried more weight than any award could. As the meeting ended, she gathered her folder and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused and looked back. One last thing, officers. When you make a mistake, own it. That's what makes you better. That's what makes you trusted. After she left, Reed slumped in his chair and exhaled. I can't believe that just happened. Daniel smiled faintly. We're lucky she's the kind of boss who teaches instead of destroys. Reed nodded. Still feels weird, though. We literally arrested her. Yeah, Daniel said, but now I get why she didn't fight it. She was testing us, watching us. As the day went on, the station buzzed again, but this time with a different tone. People still whispered, but now it wasn't just laughter. It was curiosity. Everyone wanted to know what she had said. Rumors spread that the deputy chief was launching an internal review of the store's cases. A few hours later, Daniel got a message to head to her office. He knocked gently and stepped in. She was sitting behind her desk, looking through reports. Come in, she said without looking up. I just wanted to thank you, he said quietly, for how you handled everything. She smiled without lifting her eyes. Thank me by doing better next time. That's all the thanks I need. He nodded and started to leave, but she stopped him. Officer, she said, do you know why I didn't tell anyone about the operation? He turned. Because you didn't want anyone to treat you differently? Exactly, she said, finally looking up. Sometimes people only act right when they know someone's watching. I wanted to see how the world behaves when it thinks no one important is paying attention. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. It wasn't just about theft, it was about character. When he left her office, he felt lighter. The embarrassment was still there, but it had turned into something else. Respect. Outside, Reed was waiting. How'd it go? He asked. She's something else, Daniel said with a small smile. I think we just met the kind of leader people talk about for years. As they walked out of the building together, the morning sun hit the station's glass doors. The city was already busy again, people hurrying to work unaware of what had happened the day before. To everyone else, it was just another day. But for those two officers, it was the start of seeing their job and the people they served in a completely different way. The next few days at the station were unusually quiet. The story about the deputy chief's arrest had already spread through the department, but now people were more curious than amused. Everyone wanted to know what she was really doing in that store and what the operation was about. Some said she was testing the department. Others believed she was part of a secret corruption case. Nobody knew for sure. For Daniel and Reed, the week felt longer than usual. Every time they passed another officer in the hallway, they felt eyes on them. Some faces showed sympathy, others amusement. But the strangest thing was that the deputy chief hadn't said another word to them after that meeting. She went back to her normal routine as if nothing had ever happened. Then one morning, an email went out to the entire department. It was from her office, calling for a mandatory staff meeting in the main hall. The message didn't explain what it was about, only that attendance was required. When Daniel read it, his stomach turned. You think this is about us again? He asked. Reed shrugged. Probably. She said there was something bigger going on, remember? At exactly 10 o'clock, the main hall filled with officers, detectives, and administrative staff. The air buzzed with quiet conversation until the deputy chief walked in. Instantly, the room went silent. She stood at the front, dressed sharply as always, her expression calm but serious. Good morning, she began. I called this meeting because something important needs to be addressed. Not just for this department, but for how we see the people we serve. Everyone listened closely. Her voice had that steady confidence that made people pay attention without needing to shout. Last week, she continued, I conducted an undercover operation in one of the city's shopping centers. Some of you already know what happened, but today I want all of you to understand why it happened. The room stayed completely still. Daniel felt Reed's shoulder tense next to him. For months, she said, our department has received reports about questionable arrests coming from one particular store. 5 innocent women were detained, humiliated, and treated as criminals because of false accusations made by the same store manager. Each case was closed without consequence. The women were released, but their dignity was lost in the process. That's not justice. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I decided to see the situation for myself, she continued, so I went there without notifying anyone. I wanted to see how the store would act. I also wanted to see how we would respond. She paused for a moment, letting her words settle. 2 of our officers responded that day. They followed procedure, remained calm, and treated me respectfully. But they also made the same mistake many of us make. They trusted a report before checking the facts. That's why this story matters, because doing everything by the book doesn't always mean doing what's right. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, not accusing, but challenging. We wear this uniform to protect, not to assume. We can't let our instincts be clouded by stereotypes or by the words of someone who sounds convincing. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. He knew she was right. She wasn't blaming them, but every sentence felt like a mirror reflecting his own actions. After the incident, she said, I spoke with the store's regional manager. An investigation is now underway into the behavior of the employee who made those reports. I've also spoken to the women who were previously accused. They all said the same thing. They felt judged before they even had a chance to speak. She let out a quiet sigh. That's something we must never allow to happen again. The room stayed silent. No one dared move or whisper. Even the officers who usually made jokes during meetings sat completely still. The deputy chief looked down for a moment, then raised her head again. I know some of you laughed about what happened. I heard the stories. I even heard the jokes. But what happened that day wasn't a joke. It was a test of character, and it showed me something important. Even when faced with confusion, our officers remained professional. That's what I expect from everyone here. Respect, patience, and judgment based on truth, not assumption. She closed her folder and looked directly at Daniel and Reed. Her gaze wasn't sharp, just steady. Officers Daniel and Reed stand up, every head turned toward them. Daniel's pulse quickened as he stood. Reed followed, looking pale. These 2 officers, she said, didn't know who I was when they responded to that call. They could have been careless. They could have treated me harshly. They didn't. They handled themselves with control and respect. That matters. Because it's easy to be kind when you know someone's important. It's harder when you think they're not. A few people in the crowd nodded. So, she continued, instead of punishment, they'll be assisting me with our new community trust initiative. We're going to train every officer in this department to handle civilian interactions with more understanding and empathy. These 2 will help lead the first sessions. The entire room erupted into quiet murmurs. Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Reed looked even more stunned. Thank you, officers, she said, nodding at them. They both sat back down slowly, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. After the meeting ended, people began to approach them, some offering congratulations, others still joking lightly. From handcuffs to promotions, one detective said with a grin. Not bad. Daniel just smiled faintly, but inside he felt a strange mix of pride and humility. What had started as the most embarrassing mistake of his career had somehow turned into a chance to make a difference. Later that afternoon, he was called to the deputy chief's office again. This time Reed came too. She was at her desk looking through papers when they entered. Sit down, she said warmly. Ma'am, Daniel started. We just wanted to thank you for what you said in there. You didn't have to do that. I did, she replied simply. When people do something right, even by accident, it deserves recognition. Reed smiled nervously. Still can't believe you're letting us help lead something like that. You've earned it, she said. What you went through, being embarrassed, questioned, doubted, that's exactly what many people feel when they're wrongly accused. You know that feeling now, and that makes you the right people to teach others how to do better." Her tone was calm but full of meaning. Daniel realized then that she wasn't just a leader. She was someone who believed that mistakes could turn into lessons if handled the right way. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window. "You know," she said softly, "people think leadership is about giving orders. But most of the time it's about listening. That's what the store manager forgot to do, and that's what too many of us forget as well." Daniel nodded slowly. "You were right that day about trusting your eyes more." She smiled faintly. "You remembered that?" "Yes, ma'am. I think about it every time we get a new call now." "Good," she said, "because this job isn't about being first to react. It's about being last to judge." The three of them sat quietly for a moment. The tension that had once filled the room was gone. Now there was only a calm sense of understanding. Before they left, she said, "One last thing. Don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong. The best officers are the ones who can apologize without shame." They both nodded, then stood to leave. When they stepped out into the hallway, the station felt different. Not quieter, not busier, just different. Like something in the atmosphere had shifted. Reed looked at Daniel and said, "I don't know about you, but I think this might actually turn into something good." Daniel smiled. "Yeah, I think it already has." Over the next few weeks, they worked closely with the deputy chief on her new program. They attended workshops, visited schools, and spoke at community events. For the first time, Daniel saw what policing could be when it wasn't just about enforcing rules, but about building trust. Sometimes, people still joked about the shoplifting boss story, but now the laughter felt different, softer, respectful, like everyone knew something valuable had come out of it. One evening, after a long day of community work, Daniel passed by the deputy chief's office. She was sitting alone, going through reports. He knocked gently. "Still working?" he asked. She looked up with a small smile. "Always." He hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to say thank you, not just for forgiving us, but for turning that whole mess into something meaningful." She looked at him kindly. "It wasn't a mess," she said. "It was a mirror. It showed us what we needed to see." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. When he left her office, he glanced back once more. She was already focused on her papers again, calm and steady, just like the day he first saw her in that store. But now, when he thought of her, he didn't just see the deputy chief. He saw the kind of leader who could turn mistakes into lessons, and lessons into change. And he realized something else too. Sometimes the best way to lead is to let others make the wrong move, just so they can learn what the right one looks like. The news about what happened at the station spread faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, almost everyone in the department knew that 2 patrol officers had arrested their own boss. Some laughed about it quietly in the break room. Others whispered in disbelief, and a few felt sympathy for the officers who had unknowingly made that mistake. But no one could stop talking about it. Officer Daniel barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that moment again, when he had handcuffed the woman outside the store, unaware that she was the deputy chief. The image replayed in his mind like a bad dream. He had thought he was doing his job, following protocol, acting professionally, but now it all felt wrong. He kept wondering how she must have felt being treated like a criminal by the very people she led. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the station early. The air inside felt heavy. Some officers nodded at him awkwardly, trying not to make it obvious they knew. His partner Reed looked exhausted too. They sat quietly in the locker room, neither of them saying much. Finally, Reed broke the silence. "She's not going to forgive us easily," he said quietly. Daniel looked at him. "She shouldn't have to. We messed up." Reed sighed and leaned back against the wall. "Still, she said she was undercover, right? That's not our fault. We couldn't have known." "Maybe not," Daniel replied, "but we could have been more careful. I should have checked her ID properly. I just assumed it was fake." Reed didn't answer. There wasn't much to say. They both knew the truth. The mistake had happened, and now all they could do was face the consequences. When the morning briefing began, everyone stood a little straighter than usual. Deputy Chief Helena walked in, wearing her uniform, looking calm as always. Her expression didn't show anger or frustration. She greeted the officers the same way she always did, and for a moment it felt like any other day. But when she began to speak, the room went completely silent. "I want to talk about what happened yesterday," she said, her voice firm but even. Most of you have heard the story by now. 2 of our own officers arrested me outside a store on suspicion of theft. A few people shifted awkwardly in their seats. Reed looked down at his hands. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Helena continued, "It's easy to laugh about it, and I understand why some of you might. But I don't want this to turn into gossip or blame. What happened wasn't about embarrassment. It was about procedure, perception, and how quickly we jumped to conclusions." She paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with several officers before continuing. "I was there undercover," she explained. "There had been several reports of unfair treatment in that store, false accusations against innocent people. I wanted to see how the staff handled it firsthand. But I didn't tell anyone in this department, and that was my choice. I wanted to test not just the store, but also our response." The room stayed completely quiet. Daniel felt the words hit him hard. She hadn't set them up. She'd been working to uncover injustice, and they had walked right into it. Helena went on. Officers Daniel and Reed responded quickly. "They followed the call, they arrived on time, and they didn't treat me roughly. Those are all good things. But they didn't verify my identification, didn't question the store's report deeply, and acted before confirming the facts. That's where we all need to learn something." Her tone wasn't angry. It was calm, teaching. That somehow made Daniel feel even worse. She finished by saying, "Every mistake is an opportunity to grow. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to make sure we do better, for the people we serve and for each other." Then she nodded once, signaling the end of the meeting. Everyone started moving quietly, whispering under their breath. Daniel sat frozen for a moment before standing up slowly. Reed nudged him. "Go talk to her," he whispered. "You'll feel better if you do." Daniel hesitated, but finally took a deep breath and walked toward her office. He knocked softly. Her voice came from inside. "Come in." When he entered, Helena was sitting behind her desk reviewing some files. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Daniel," she said calmly. "I was expecting you." He stood awkwardly near the door. "Ma'am, I just wanted to apologize. For everything." She put the file down and leaned back in her chair. "You don't have to apologize, Daniel. You were doing your job." "I know," he said, "but I could have handled it better. I didn't look closely at your ID. I didn't listen when you tried to explain. I just assumed." She nodded slowly. "Assumptions are easy, especially in this job. We see patterns, we act fast, we think we're saving time. But sometimes that speed costs us understanding." He nodded, his throat tight. "I just wanted you to know I've learned from it. I won't make the same mistake again." Helena gave a small smile. "That's all I needed to hear." When he left her office, he felt lighter. Still embarrassed, but also relieved. She hadn't yelled, hadn't humiliated him. Instead, she had turned the entire thing into a lesson, not just for him, but for everyone. In the following days, Helena arranged a training session for the entire department. She invited a community speaker and some legal advisors to talk about bias, judgment, and fair procedure. The room was packed and the atmosphere was serious but thoughtful. For the first time in a long time, everyone listened, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to understand. During the session, Helena shared real stories, people who had been wrongly accused, cases where quick assumptions had destroyed trust. She never mentioned her own incident directly, but everyone knew that's what started it all. Daniel and Reed sat in the front row paying full attention. After the meeting ended, several officers came up to them, clapping them on the shoulders, saying things like, "Tough luck, but you handled it well," and "She's right. We all could have done the same thing." It wasn't teasing anymore, it was respect. Somehow their mistake had opened everyone's eyes. A few weeks later, an internal investigation into the store revealed that several past theft reports had been completely false. The store manager had a pattern of accusing certain customers without proof. Helena's undercover visit exposed everything. The company fired the manager and publicly apologized. News of the incident spread through local media, but Helena made sure the focus stayed on reform, not blame. One afternoon, Daniel was sitting in the break room when Helena walked in. She had a few papers in her hand and asked if she could sit. Of course, everyone agreed immediately. She placed the papers on the table and said, "The department is introducing a new protocol for verifying IDs and handling civilian complaints. It'll make things smoother and fairer." Daniel nodded. "That's good news, ma'am. I think it'll really help." Helena smiled. It already has. Change starts small. Then she turned to Daniel and Reed and said quietly, "By the way, I want to thank you both again. You could have tried to hide what happened. You could have written false notes or covered it up. But you didn't. You told the truth. That matters more than you realize." They both looked a bit surprised. Reed said, "We didn't really have a choice, ma'am." She shook her head. "There's always a choice. You chose integrity." Her words stayed with them long after she left the room. Over the next month, things slowly returned to normal. The jokes faded, the tension eased, and the story became something people mentioned as a reminder, not a rumor. The department felt closer somehow, more aware, more human. Daniel found himself watching people differently now. When he pulled someone over or responded to a call, he took an extra moment to look, listen, and think. The job wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about understanding people. And he owed that lesson to the woman he once arrested without realizing who she was. Helena continued her work quietly. She never used the story to promote herself or gain attention. Instead, she let the outcome speak for itself. Under her leadership, the department's relationship with the community began to improve. People noticed the change. More patience, more empathy, more respect. One evening, as Daniel was leaving the station, he saw Helena walking out toward her car. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. He called out to her, and she turned, smiling slightly. "Heading home?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, long day." "Always is," she said. "But you did good work today." "Keep it up," he smiled. "Thank you, ma'am." As she drove off, Daniel stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear down the street. He thought about how strange life could be, how a single mistake could turn into a lesson that changed everything. That day outside the store had started as one of the worst moments of his career. But now, looking back, it felt like the beginning of something better, a reminder that even in uniform they were still human. And being human meant learning, changing, and growing. The weeks that followed felt different for everyone at the department. Daniel and Reed returned to their regular patrol duties, but nothing felt quite the same. Their hands had been forced into a lesson that most officers learned only after years of experience. Now, every call they answered, every interaction with the public, carried the weight of what they had witnessed and learned from the deputy chief. Even though the incident at the store was behind them, people still whispered occasionally. Some laughed about the shoplifting boss story. Others joked quietly in the locker room. Daniel used to feel embarrassed whenever he heard it, but now it was different. He could smile and even laugh a little. It wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about growth. One morning, he arrived at the station to find a small group of officers gathered near the briefing room. Helena was standing at the front, speaking quietly but with authority. As Daniel approached, she noticed him and gestured for him and Reed to join. "We have something important to discuss," she said, looking at the group and then directly at the two officers. "The recent events have shown me not only the importance of following procedure, but also the value of integrity, honesty, and humility. I want this department to be stronger, smarter, and more aware of how we interact with the community." Daniel listened closely, feeling a mixture of pride and nervousness. He knew the conversation would touch on them, and he braced himself. "I've decided to create a new program," Helena continued. "It will focus on fairness, observation, and proper verification. Officers will participate in workshops and real-life simulations, helping them better understand the people they serve. And the first team to lead this initiative will be Officers Daniel and Reed." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Us?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Helena replied calmly. "You two experience firsthand what happens when assumptions are made. You know the consequences. You also demonstrated honesty and professionalism under unusual circumstances. That's why you're the perfect officers to guide this training." Reed looked at Daniel, his mouth open. We're actually leading it?" Helena nodded. "You will. And you'll do it well. I trust you." The weight of responsibility pressed on both officers, but it was different this time. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like an opportunity to make a real difference. Over the next few days, Daniel and Reed worked closely with Helena and a small team to organize the first set of workshops.